One of the first major problems that the first century church had to face, and which certainly spilled over into the second century, is they had to define their relationship to the very present and all-dominating Roman government. The Roman Empire occupied the entire Mediterranean basin on both sides, so southern Europe up to parts of Germany, all the way east through the Middle East and what we know of certainly as Israel and the Arab countries, and south through North Africa. The Romans controlled everything. And as the church gained in membership and prominence, the church was certainly going to draw the attention of the Roman Empire. And the first relationship of the church to the Roman Empire was, in fact, persecution. And we can actually mark the history of the early church through the various waves of persecution as Roman authorities took varying degrees of notice of this fledgling but growing church. The first persecution, and one of the two that actually appears within the pages of the New Testament, is the persecution of the Emperor Nero. We probably heard the stories of Nero burning the city down for purposes of a backdrop so he could play his musical instrument, an opera he wrote, The Ruins of Troy. Probably not a true story, but there was a disastrous fire in Rome, provided an ideal excuse for Nero to look for a scapegoat, and the Christians in his city were the scapegoat, and it was a serious persecution. The Christian tradition suggests that Paul was in fact beheaded during this Neronic persecution. In the 90s, we have a second emperor who takes some serious notice of the Christian movement, and there's some new things happening within Christianity that causes the emperor to take notice. More and more prominent Roman citizens are in fact becoming Christians. Even members of the Roman government and the Roman Senate are becoming Christians. And this, the Roman emperor, in this case Domitian, is seeing as a threat. And in the 90s, we see once again an active persecution of the Christians. Now, I don't want you to make of this more than it actually is. There was never a truly empire-wide persecution where Christians everywhere were challenged to denounce Christ or die. It was episodic. It was taken up at various times and then just kind of dropped off at others, or at other times it would happen in some geographic regions and not others. It wouldn't always be a capital crime. Sometimes they would just take away your property or arrest you. But the relationship between the church and the state was troubled, and the church was oppressed, and the state was the oppressor. Now, there were two options that the church might take under those circumstances, and in fact, I think you could see both of them within the New Testament. One of the options is to regard the state as demonic, that the reason that the state is opposing and persecuting the church is because they are controlled by the evil one. And in fact, the book of Revelation, the last book of the New Testament, was written during the persecution of Domitian. And the book of Revelation, in fact, is encoded anti-Roman propaganda, as the author is claiming that Rome is demonic, and the opposition of Rome to the church is inspired by the devil, and that Christ will soon return and completely overrun and overturn and displace and replace the Roman Empire. That's really the basic message of the book of Revelation, not all this futuristic stuff that people get out of it all the time. It's anti-Roman Christian propaganda in the form of what we call apocalyptic literature, and that was all about the rule of Domitian. And the other response is to just say we're going to be persecuted for the sake of righteousness, but we're going to be good citizens and we're going to trust in God, and that God will ultimately work through the government to protect us. So in one case, the church sees the church as demonic, and the other they see the church, they see the state as demonic, and the other they see the state as benevolent, as a parental figure or as demonic. Now, all of this changed, and this is an important date for us. It's 312. All of this changed in 312 when the Emperor Constantine, who is a very important figure for us in Christian tradition, when the Emperor Constantine tolerated the church, made it legal to be a Christian in the Roman Empire. Now, the Roman Empire had religions that were licit or legal and religions that were not. And there were certain protections and advantages and privileges that were given to legal religions. And in 312, the Emperor Constantine made Christianity a legal religion. And at that point, everything began to change, because the last barrier to the expansion and the influence of the church had in fact broken down. And what we see is that the relationship of the Roman Empire and the Roman culture and the church begins to change, and it becomes very mutual. By that I mean the church, by being tolerated by Rome and actually being quite popular, many influential Christians within the Roman government and the Roman nobility, the church transforms Rome. And Rome becomes a different kind of place. And some years later, Christianity, in fact, does become the official religion of the Roman Empire. But the change, and this is what I want to emphasize, takes place the other way. What we might call the making of the church a copy of the Roman Empire. And all of a sudden we see church buildings being built in the model of Roman public buildings. And we see that whereas before it was somehow socially difficult and painful to be a Christian, and it might in some cases lead to your social ostracism or the seizure of your property or the ruins of your business or maybe even imprisonment and death. Now, all of a sudden, it became politically advantageous for a Roman citizen to become a Christian. They might get better business connections when they become a Christian. And as you might imagine, the commitment to the church, the zeal with which the early followers of Jesus willingly suffered persecution, suffering, and death for the sake of Christ, now we get the church in a kind of spiritual crisis, where the commitment of the people to the beliefs of the early church, in fact, are less important in some cases than the social contact. And the bishops increase in power. Now, this resulted in, as I said, a significant watering down of the earlier fire or enthusiasm that the church had. Where is that fire and enthusiasm going to go? We'll see that in a subsequent class when we follow the rise of monasticism. I mentioned earlier that at a certain point in the administrative history of the Roman Empire, they decided to divide into two different administrative regions, one in the east and one in the west. And what we see is that the presence of the emperor of the Roman Empire in Constantinople, modern-day Turkey, meant that the emperor had a lot more influence over the Eastern churches than he did in the Western churches, where the administrator of the Western Empire was subsidiary to the emperor in Constantinople. I hope that made sense. Anyway, it made for very different responses to this church-state issue as we get to the latter part of the first millennium. And we have a Western approach which really regards the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, as in fact superior to the administrative leaders of the various forms in which politics took in Europe during this time. So the Pope is more important than the leaders of state, and we'll see how that plays out in the Middle Ages. The second approach, the Eastern approach, where the emperor was so very much more present, that approach seemed to give the emperor a much more powerful hand. There never was a single central Eastern bishop. There were, in fact, a few of them, and the emperor became the single visual, personal embodiment of the unity of the church. And so the emperor in the East exerted a lot more authority over the church than did the emperor in the West.